Cool. So yeah, looks like things are going well. Things are all set up. Perfect. All right. Well, I think we will get started in just a minute here. Thanks for joining. Awesome. So we are, we're here to celebrate the release of my newest book. So I'm just going to start out with just introducing myself. My name is Leane Winger, and I'm an author, and I live in Mackenzie, BC, a remote community here in northern BC, and I write fiction. I also write poetry. I write stage plays and musicals, and I am now celebrating just completing a trilogy. The third book in the trilogy just came out this weekend, and I am super excited to be sharing that with all of you and celebrating, because I know I have friends and readers all across the country and beyond, and so to celebrate, I really wanted a chance to connect with whoever wants to join, whether you're here locally in the community or somewhere further away. So thanks so much for joining us. This is awesome. And yes, this is just going to be a chill, just chance for me to share a bit about the story, about the series, and a chance to celebrate. So thank you so much for joining. Just going to kind of give just another minute here for people to keep jumping on, and then we'll get going. But yeah, and I also wanted to encourage you that you're welcome to put any questions you have in the comments, and later on I'll get to those. I would love to hear your questions about the new book, about the whole series, and be able to share about that.
Can you see comments?
Yes. All right. So yeah, the new book is, I'll show it here. So this is Ablaze. This is my newest book that's come out in the series. It's the final book in the trilogy. So I've got all three of them here. So the first book was Spark, which is the first book in the trilogy. And then we have Ashes, which came out at the start of this year. And the final one is Ablaze. And so yeah, I'm so happy with how they turned out. I think that they're absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to hold them all up together because I think that they are just so pretty. 1, 2, 3. Which is just a beautiful set. Very, just matches, so cohesive. Really thankful for the work of my digital designer, Aiden Walker. He designed all the covers. And so yeah, I just absolutely love it. This beautiful design, and it's hard to see kind of the small texture of it over the video, but just up close is just even more detailed and beautiful. And then there's the second one there, and the third one with the flame. So yeah, so this trilogy is a fantasy trilogy. It covers the story of an elf who embarks on this great adventure of exploration, discovery, getting swept up in this amazing journey that transforms her life and ultimately changes the whole course of history in her world. So yeah, I am so proud of it, and I'm so excited that it's now finished and that people are able to read the whole thing. So it means a lot to me. It's been quite the journey. I started writing this trilogy just over 2.5 years ago, which is crazy to think about. That, so I embarked on it. I wanted to write it as a cohesive story. So that was really important for me, that even though each book really is its own story, it's got to start, it's going to end, it wraps things up, but it's also, the whole trilogy is a cohesive story. So I wrote it starting one book, but then when I was finished writing one book, I went right into writing the next book. So that was a pretty long process. and ended up being just shy of 300,000 words for the whole series. So it's so cool just seeing it like 2, 3. And yeah, so that process, so I wrote the first drafts in pretty much exactly a year, which was a wild ride of a year. I can remember getting a few months in, I think it was maybe 4 months in or so to the writing process. I was still working on the first book, and my husband Jesse was like, oh, I bet you're gonna write the whole first draft in a year. And I was like, no way, there's no way that I can write this whole thing in a year. But as I was getting into the rhythm of it, picked up, and yeah, I was able to write the whole first draft in a year, which was a super cool accomplishment and milestone to be able to make. And then since that point, it's been the editing, it's been all of the other production stuff, getting covers, getting the formatting and publishing and all of that stuff. Yeah, so that has been a bit of the journey. The first book, Spark, published pretty much exactly a year ago. Ashes was published early this year. And now the third one, Ablaze, is coming out now. So yeah, 2.5 years. Thanks so much for joining. For those who have been jumping in, we are celebrating the release of my newest book, which is Ablaze, the final book in the Reawakening Trilogy. And I am so excited to be sharing that, and just a chance to celebrate with my friends and readers from around the world. So thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, and just a reminder, and for those who have been joining in, I would love for you to drop any questions you have into the chat. I am watching those comments as they come through. Thanks for all of the greetings. It's great to see you. And yeah, if you have any questions about this latest book or about my writing in general, about the trilogy, feel free to write those in there and we'll get to them in a little bit. Awesome. So yeah, I would love to share with you a bit about this story. So this is a story that means a lot to me, and it is a fantasy story. So I love fantasy. That's a genre that I've really enjoyed ever since I was young. A big fan of Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Narnia, other, maybe less known fantasy works like Enchanted Forest Chronicles, stories like that. Love Discworld by Sir Terry Pratchett. And so the idea of creating a fantasy world is something that has always been in my mind. And so a few years ago, my husband Jesse and I decided to embark in inventing a world. We are both huge fans of tabletop role-playing games, and we'd been playing for quite a while and loved the idea of inventing our own gaming system. So that is something that we wanted to do, because the gaming systems that we had played, you get ideas. You're like, oh, well, if the mechanics were more like this, that'd be more fun, or that would be more interesting. And so, my husband Jesse built all of the mechanisms for this new system that we were working on, and we invented this world, and we wanted to also be able to tell stories in that world. So this specific trilogy is obviously based in that world, and it's based in the history. So our gaming system, which we call Tova, is kind of the modern day, in the sense of that is the time frame of when people can play games in that world. But of course, like any world, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of backstory to how the world ended up the way it is. And so we wanted to tell this one specific story about a key time period, a key event in the distant past. So this story takes place, I think, about 2,000 years before the time when people would be playing in the game. And so we knew kind of this basic idea of like this is a time in history, something that happened that was very defining for the whole world. And I also had a character, Thea, who was a character who I had created a while before. And so from there, we started to think about, well, what would this look like? What would it look like to be a person living at this time in this world and this adventure, and how it unfolds and grows and eventually becomes this world-defining event. So yeah, that's a little bit about how the story came to be. And yeah, so in the story, it follows an elf who sets out on this adventure, and she gets to learn so much about the world as she meets different kinds of people, different places, and has to overcome a lot of her own prejudices, her own limitations as she grows and really becomes an iconic figure of history. Yeah, so super excited that that story wraps up. I honestly think that that Ablaze, the final book in the trilogy, it's my favorite book that I've written so far. I absolutely love it, and I think a lot of that is the payoff of, like, each book in the series is great, and I love it, and it's got a great story to tell, but it's been building and building. And so now in the final one, we get to bring everything together, all the different moments that the characters have been through are really building up to this point. So there's a lot of payoff, a lot of excitement, a lot of danger, and yeah, just very excited to be able to share that with everyone, because I think it's super fun, and yeah, I love the climax to this story. So yeah, I see a question there from Cassandra. Hi, Cassandra. About roadblocks, writer's blocks, and overcoming them. Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's the first one that comes to mind is honestly a really silly roadblock, in the sense of it's often little things that I'll just be writing a scene and there'll be something like she has to cross the room. She, like, just in terms of the space, she's over here for whatever reason, I need to get her over there. And I'll be like, she walked across the room. Like, I'm like, no, that doesn't sound good. It needs to, like, have some sort of intention, personality, something. And I'll just sit there and stare at it for so long, just being like, I don't know how to make her walk across the room. And so, honestly, those are some of the worst writer's block moments, because it's also so silly in my mind. Like, it's not that it's silly, that it's a challenge, because different things can be challenging, but just that idea of, like, just a simple thing to say. The bigger problems, in a way, they can be still harder to figure out, but you can, because they're bigger, you can come at them from different angles. You can talk them out with someone, be like, hey, like, I'm trying to figure out, like, their motivation for doing this or whatever, and then we can talk it through and figure it out. But those little things, it's like, hey, can you help me get this person to walk across the room? And then just, whoever I'm talking to looks at me like, just say they walked across the room. This isn't rocket science. Yeah, so that's something that comes to mind. I'm glad you can relate. Yeah, those moments. But, you know, you get through them, and sometimes you end up writing it just, you walked across the room and you carry on and come back later, and sometimes it's like, oh, okay, now I've got something to work with. But yeah. Let's see, what character was hardest for you to bring to life? Which one felt most easy and natural? Oh, interesting. Yeah, characters. Yeah, I love the characters in my story. There's lots of really fun characters. Yeah, difficult. Yeah, I think that let's go to the more easy ones first. I think that some of the most easy characters to write were some of the characters I started out the story with. There were some characters that I had inspiration from some of the role-playing games that we played with friends and stuff. And so I had just a really solid idea of how they talked, of some, like, their motivations and things like that. So characters like Silica, characters like Ulfgar, were a lot easier to write because I had just a deep ingrained sense of, like, this is who I think they are, and being able to just run with that. I also found that characters who are a little more extreme in some way, like they have a quirk that it really leans into that quirk. So, you know, Silica is just really over the top. She's enthusiastic. She loves life. She loves everybody. And so in a way that was really easy to write because you can really lean into that defining feature of how they present themselves in the world. A character like Ulfgar, he's very surly. He's rough around the edges. He's grumpy. If he's gonna make a snide if there's a chance to make a snide comment, he's gonna make that comment. And so just kind of leaning into that makes it a lot easier to write. I find that the characters who don't have that kind of quirk or that shtick or that way they present themselves in the world, it is harder to try to write them in that more nuanced way, where they are more just trying to write them as maybe relatable rather than being quirky. I'm trying to think if there is a specific difficult character. I mean, in a way, it sounds funny to say, but writing the main character, Thea, was actually in its own way kind of difficult, partly because she's a character that has existed in my mind for a long time, but finally kind of pinning her down and being like, okay, it is how she'd react in this situation, was kind of difficult. And building someone's inner world, because the whole story is really told through her eyes, pretty much. There's a few little scenes where I do jump POV character to someone else, but for the vast majority of the trilogy, it's all through her eyes. And so trying to navigate that and be like, this is objectively what happened, but this would be her take on what happened. So being able to depict that in a way that still communicates what actually happened, but also what she thinks about it at the same time, is difficult. So yeah, so I think that's a thought on that. So yeah, thanks for those questions. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I'd love to hear those. I was thinking about, in preparation for this, okay, we have another question here. Did I know the whole storyline from the very beginning? Yes and no. So basically the very basic building blocks of the story, we knew, like, this is the event that happened in history. So in that same way, like, you look in a history book at some sort of defining event that shaped the world. And there's certain bare bones things you know about it. Like, you know that these were the key players, and this is the basic thing that happened and how it affected history. But in terms of what it would be like to actually parachute into that event and actually get to know the people, know their motivations, and all of the steps to get where you go in the story, a lot of that was a mystery. To be honest, especially the second book in the story, Ashes, there was the most amount of mystery for me in writing that one. Spark kind of sets things off, so we had a pretty good idea of where the story was going to go. Like, there were still things to explore and discover along with Thea as she went on her adventures, but the second book we very much knew, okay, this is where we're starting, this is where we need to end, because this is the kickoff for the third book. And the very basic, like, pretty much what you would read on the back cover level of information in terms of how the story was going to go. And then there was a lot of evolving, a lot of, okay, so, this would be interesting. If that happens, what would be the ramifications? How would this play into the whole picture? And so it was definitely a combination of having having the roadmap, but then exploring a lot on the way. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that question. I was thinking about some of the difficult parts of writing, related back a bit to the roadblock question, but just in terms of like topics. So as a trilogy, as most stories, there's a lot of different elements to the story, and I was thinking about, well, what are some of the difficult parts of that? And to be fair, probably the hardest thing to write in the whole trilogy, romance. The romance aspect is very hard for me to write. I think that has been the biggest challenge. That said, there are couples that we meet throughout the story who are already a couple, and that wasn't difficult. Like having a characters who are already in that relationship, they know like their part in it. So for example, there's a captain of a ship, her name's Svenka, and she's in a relationship with her first mate, Demian. Their relationship was super easy to write. Just the dynamics of this very rough around the edges, sarcastic, sardonic captain with her kind of easygoing first mate, kind of likes to poke the bear and tease her, but ultimately has got her back. So really enjoy writing their relationship. There's other relationships in the story, but the whole concept of writing the beginning of a relationship, the idea of falling in love and what that looks like, is very difficult. I think part of why that's difficult is it's a very individual experience. Different people fall in love in different ways, and there's different things that they admire and like about people. There's different things that they find attractive. And so to try to write that in a way that will connect with people, and that feels natural, that isn't cringy or over the top or understated, because you also don't want to be like, oh wait, there was a romance going on there, didn't notice that. So trying to find that sweet spot is very difficult. So I think that is probably the hardest part about writing this trilogy. Overall, I'd say a close second, not close, but probably second place is combat. There is a lot of fighting in this trilogy, and that is really hard to do well, because it's not like a movie. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of difficult things to really do a good job on a movie combat also. I'm not saying that that's not its own kind of tricky, but in general, fighting, combat, swords, arrows, spears, shields, it's very visual. Like you can see in your mind, the army is charging, they're breaking through the ranks of the enemy, the arrows are flying overhead, like you can see these images, but to be able to communicate that in a written way is tricky, because you can't control the pacing. You can't be like, oh, there's that brief shot of an arrow hitting that person and them falling down and screaming. You have to put words on it. You have to pin it down. And the more words that you use to describe something, the longer you perceive it taking. And so trying to balance that, you write a description of a moment, and the more you describe it, the more people will picture that being like a lingering moment. Whereas if you describe something else and it's just a few short words, then it's faster. And so trying to balance the pacing of a combat kind of scene to communicate the tension, to communicate the danger, and still help people to know what's going on, and to be able to keep track of the key players. That was definitely also a difficult part in the process of of communicating those parts of the story. So yeah, I would say that's probably the second most difficult aspect of writing these stories, but I learned a lot through it for sure, and let's just say I got a lot of practice. There's definitely several times that that weapons violence happens in this trilogy, so was able to work a lot on that process, and I think by the end I feel really proud of the combats, and from what I've heard from my readers so far, they're able to really catch the tension and in danger of those moments. So yeah, that's a bit more about some of the challenges of writing this story. Thanks to everyone who's been joining in. It's great to see you. I'm just sharing a bit about my trilogy, about my newest book, Ablaze, which is the third book in the Reawakening Trilogy. It's a chance to celebrate with friends and readers from all over. And yeah, so I'm just encouraging anyone, if you have any questions about the book, about my writing process, about the trilogy in general, feel free to put those in the comments, and yeah, I'll answer those and yeah, share more about my writing. So another topic that I'd love to share about, which I was able to share a bit about too, is the characters. I think that stories, one of the things we love to talk about in stories is the characters. We have our favorite characters that we love to cheer on. We have the characters who we love to hate and that we want to see go down. Yeah, and so for me, in this story, I mean, picking favorite characters when you've written a book is a little bit like asking someone to, pick a favorite child, where it's, you really shouldn't do that, but it's, yeah, and I mean, I am quite attached to Thea. She's the main character. Of course, because she's the main character, a lot of the story is through her eyes and through her perspective, and she's someone who I relate to a lot, and kind of her journey of exploring, of self-discovery, of discovering the world, of growing in her faith, and ultimately her calling in life. Yeah, and so it's so neat to see how she was able to grow and develop through the story. Some of my other favorite characters, I mean, I think that I've heard from a lot of people that both Silica and Ulfgar are fan favorites. People really like them. I do enjoy writing Silica's character. She's very flamboyant and very enthusiastic about everything in life, and I think that it was fun to write in a way that I could drop some of my filters, just be like, if I was in this situation, whatever came into my head, like, I would just say that. And so it's fun to really lean into a bit of the crazy, and just that, her just sheer love of life. But what I love about her as a character too is because she's so optimistic and so hopeful, and and just loving life so much, that when something is hard for her, it's really impactful. And I love that about her, because when she suddenly stops and she's like, oh, that's really sad, that's just really hard, and she doesn't know how to deal with the hard things in life, and we see her struggle with that. I think that that's honestly some of the most powerful moments in the story, because of that contrast of her continual optimism, but then when it runs into something that she can't just make go away by giving it candy and hugs and smiles, that we as readers also have to stop and be like, wow, like this is tough. And I do enjoy diving into some of the harder things as well, like things like death and loss, and what to do when you failed, and how to struggle through making amends and reconciliation with people who you've hurt. And those kind of themes as well are a big part of the story. And I think that stories are a beautiful way of being able to explore some of the hard things in life too, in a setting where we can say, like, okay, it's separate from us, but also we become so invested in the story that it's a chance to explore some of those harder things in a way that's safe and in a way that can sometimes really help when those harder things come up in our own lives. So Stephen wonders what the silliest part of the story is. Ooh, silliest part of the story. That's a tricky one. I mean, Silica is definitely probably the silliest character in the story. So a lot of the things that she does are silly. I think that, especially as she has shenanigans with her candy bag, are maybe some of the silliest parts in the story. Yeah, so I think that's probably it. Something to do with Silica would be the silliest. Yeah, so I'm trying to think if there's any silly moments not related to Silica. I'm sure that there's some, but she definitely brings a lot of the levity into the story. Awesome, yeah. So I think I will just, while anyone else might be writing other questions they have, I just thought I'd share a little bit about my publishing process. So my books are self-published, which has been a big learning process. I was able to, I got through a lot of the more difficult part of the learning process with my earlier books, which I also have probably here. My very first book that I ever published was The Door, a mountaineering adventure novel, which is a great time, a really exciting story. And then I also published an anthology of poetry exploring the topic of grief. So I had already gone through the publishing process a couple of times, but yeah, setting out on a new publishing process, I did dive into a new distributor. So basically the process for me looks like, once all of the editing on the book is done, then I start working on the formatting. I have a program that lets me do that in terms of actually getting the inside to look, like a real book, and getting the covers designed. My digital designer, Aidan Walker, did a fantastic job on these covers and got all of the details on that just the way I needed it, which was awesome. And so I use a distributor where basically I upload all things. So I upload the manuscript and the cover files and everything, and then they distribute it. So they send it to all sorts of online stores, places like Barnes and Noble, and ebook kind of stores as well, like Apple Books and Google Play Books and things like that. So basically it just becomes available all over, which is awesome. And then I also order some copies for myself that I sell through my website or in person to people who are wanting to buy them. But yeah, I think that, so it's been a journey. It's been really, honestly, a super cool experience to publish books myself, because it's given me a really deep appreciation for every step that goes into a book. Because, you walk into the bookstore and you pick up a book, and you might think about the author and how they wrote the story, but the number of details that go into going from a story into an actual book you can hold in your hands it's amazing just how much goes into it, just from just little details, things like what size of font, what style of font, what sort of chapter markings, title page, even the amount of decisions that need to go into front matter and back matter. You pick up a book and you flip to where the story starts, but there's so many things that come before and after the story. Things like, lists of other books, copyright pages, maps. I was able to do some map design, which was really fun as well. And so all of those details, the things like the back cover, things like barcodes, and just all of those details, it's a very fascinating process. And I just really feel so fortunate to be able to really have been so hands-on, whether in the future, maybe I'll be able to do some traditional publishing in the future, we'll see. But I really will always cherish this time that I've had of really being so hands-on in the whole process. It's helped me really appreciate that so much. And I will say that probably my least favorite part of self-publishing is writing the back cover blurb. That's hard. I think it's something that you read a book and it's kind of like, okay, this is what's stuck in my head. This is, a snippet of what the story means. But for me, or for anyone being the author and being like, I know so much about this story and everything that's going on, and how do I distill this down into something that correctly represents the story in a way that you don't want someone to read the back and then read the story and be like, okay, like in what universe was that blurb about? Because this is not that story. So it needs to accurately represent the story. It needs to catch the attention, be like, ooh, this sounds interesting. But it can't give away too much. And so it's a very tricky thing. So that's probably the hardest part of the whole self-publishing process is writing that little blurb that goes in the back. It's just a few little words, but a lot of blood, sweat, and tears goes into that. So I have another question here. Do I have difficulty balancing accuracy and what you want to happen in your writing? That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I think that this is where my husband Jesse really, really keeps me in line, because I will sometimes write something that I'm like, this is what I want to happen. I think it would be exciting, or it'd be whatever reason this is thing. And then I'll be like, what do you think? And I'll show him the chapter, show him the section, and he'll be like, that would never happen. And I'm like, dang it! No! I have to rewrite it. I liked it so much. But it's always for the best, I find. So he's really good at grounding me and help bring me back to both just in terms of things like physics and reality and science, but also in terms of sometimes even motivation things where it's like, you made that person do that. I don't think they would have done that. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. They wouldn't have done that. So I've definitely had some grumbling as a result of those moments. But at the same time, I often find that once I've gone through that, and sometimes it's a lot harder to be like, okay, well, for example, if I need the story to get from A to B somehow because of the bigger plot, we need to end up at B, that there's sometimes quite a bit of, okay, so what needs to happen to make that happen? Like if that needs to happen for the story, and sometimes then it's not the easy route, and often, and probably always, it's ended up being a lot better, where it's added a whole new dynamic to the story of like, okay, now there's this new complication. How are we going to deal with this? Or it's given a character a chance to be maybe more proactive than I was going to make them be, or maybe to make a mistake that I wouldn't naturally have wanted them to make, but then they make that mistake and have to deal with the consequences. So yeah, but it's a tricky one, because there's a lot of ideas and a lot of things, and I think that a big part of as writers and authors, what we owe to our readers is to be consistent with the world we've created. I mean, with fantasy, you have a certain amount of leeway because it's not the real world, so you can make certain things happen that maybe couldn't happen in our world, but then you do still have to be consistent. You can't have a magical MacGuffin show up and let them have some sort of special ability and then be like, oh, well, but they didn't use that power that other time because they didn't, because it wasn't convenient for the story. So that being consistent, it's often makes it harder in the short term, but ultimately makes the story stronger in the long term. So yeah, no, that's definitely been a struggle, but yeah, thankful to Jessie for keeping me on track when I would like to take the story into the land of convenience and of what I want to have happen, even if it doesn't make sense. So yeah, no, that's an awesome question. Thank you. All right. So yeah, I'm just gonna give us a little bit more. If anyone has any other questions, so thank you so much for those who have put questions in the chat. I'm just looking through to see if I missed anything here. But yeah, it's been such a neat journey to write a whole trilogy. I think that there's something really cool about a trilogy. I think that it's has its own challenges for sure. I think that because it's this 3-in-1 kind of setting where you've got one book, you have a story, you have an arc, and you want to wrap it up. You want someone to be able to finish the first book and feel satisfied, not feel like, it's not this quite the same tone as, say, an episode in a show, even episodes have often a kind of wrap up. But with books, someone's invested quite a lot of time into reading just the first book in a series, and so you want to have especially the themes and story that's unique to that book. It needs to wrap up. You want to feel that enough of the loose ends are tied up, that you've accomplished something, that you finished something. But at the same time, you need enough loose ends and enough forward momentum that, well, it makes sense. This isn't just the end. The story carries on, and then you get into the second book. Middle books are hard. Middle books are really hard because they need to stand on their own. Like, you want to be able to pick up a book and read it and have it be a complete story. However, although it didn't ultimately start at the start of this book. We have everything that came before it leading up to this moment. So you need to be able to build off that while also not assuming that someone just put down the last book and picked up the next one. Although, ultimately that would be great. And I hope that there's a lot of readers who will do that. But sometimes there's been a while since they've read the first one. And so to be able to have a strong start and be able to have it stand to a certain degree on its own as well, and again, have some sort of satisfying conclusion, or at least a wrap-up that makes sense why the book stopped here, and then to finally get into the last one, which again, for me, in my book, the third one definitely springs out of the ending of the second one, but at the same time, some of the themes, some of the character arcs and story arcs very much are unique to this book, while at the same time wrapping up all of those long threads and long story arcs and themes that started right at the beginning of the first book. But it's definitely, I love it. I think that there's a lot of payoff in this book because we have all these characters that we've been getting to know for so long. And so we have a lot of time to have gotten to know their motivations, get to know them, care about them, want them to succeed. And so then as the dangers ramp up and as the stakes rise, then that can lead to a really thrilling ride. So I'm so excited for people to be able to start reading this. I'll love to hear what you think. So if you do get a chance to read it, please just drop a review or a comment wherever convenient on the interwebs, and I'll be sure to read those reviews and comments because I love to hear what you think of my books, and being able to share that with you. I think that one thing that I find about writing fiction or longer form stories in general is it's really a process of patience. It's not a quick reward. You don't get that hit of like, yeah, I succeeded in a thing in the same way. I mean, you set those small goals for yourself, like, yes, I met my word goal today, or yes, I finished that chapter. Like, there are those rewards along the way. But ultimately, you can't share it until you're done in a complete form. Being able to be like, well, now it's actually finished. The words are the words I want there. It's not just a story idea. It's not just bits and pieces, but it's a complete thing. Being able to share that and for someone else to be able to read it and experience it. It's a long time coming before you're actually able to have that payoff, in the sense of just having a story and wanting to share it with the world, wanting people to be able to experience it and enjoy it. So that's a big part of why I'm doing this live stream today, this chance to connect, because it's done. And so I just really wanted to celebrate, to be able to share that with all of you, because yeah, it's very exciting. We have another comment here. Stephen wonders why we can't play the game during the time the story is written. That's a great question. So ultimately, yes, you can. You could. The game system is really just about how you build characters, how they interact in terms of rolling checks for wanting to do things, accomplish things, how they interact with their general, and all things. And ultimately, that does not change over the course of the history of the world. So you really can play a game at any point in the history of the world. The main difference is in terms of what the world outside of the system is like. So with our gaming system, we are not just sharing kind of the rules of how, like, okay, this is when you roll the dice and this is the number you add to it and how that all works. But there is a lot of information in terms of the cultures. So the different kinds of people, the elves and the littles and the minothrils and everyone, and how they interact with each other as different groups. And then a lot of the key locations in the world. So the primary beginning adventure information is set in the land of Arvira. So we have information, we have a whole guide to Arvira coming out in terms of information about each of the kingdoms, the capital cities and primary locations, some of the basic history, things like kings and principal political players, so that when you're playing a game at that point in time, you can have this framework to then build your own story if you want, or to use story prompts that we kind of build into the world in terms of different mysteries of, like, oh, there was this gold rush in the mountains, but then, everyone suddenly just disappeared and no one goes back there now. And it's like, ooh, it's like this little story hooks where you could be like, okay, well, let's set a campaign there because this could be really interesting. So we're really developing broadly what the whole world is like at this kind of playable time. That said, you can take the gaming system and play at a time in history. Absolutely. The main thing is that a lot of the cultural information and world information would be different. So, for example, there's a location in the books that we meet called Gedwild, and at the time that I'm writing in this trilogy, it is, one of the biggest cities around, but it's still not that big. Like, I don't really care to put a number on it, but maybe about 3,000 people or something. So it's like, it's for that time, it's quite big. There's quite a lot of people, but it's all humans. It's a human town until during the time of the story, other races start moving there and they start living among each other. But it starts out very monoculture and very kind of agrarian, just little farms, some trade with other city-states. But then jump forward 2,000 years in history at the playable time. Now it is a huge city. It's a massive trading port. It's a place where people from all over the world live and interact and trade and then go out to bring their goods across the world. And so the description of that place that's going to go with the game is very different than the description we read in the books because it's at a different point in history. So, I mean, ultimately, when you play any tabletop role-playing game, the story is yours to explore. You can make up things, you can just be really innovative, but in terms of if you're wanting to springboard off the material that we've given, there's kind of all the information from this one time period. But, you know, if you've read the trilogy, you really love that, and you're like, I'd like to play a game based on something that happens in the trilogy, you can absolutely do that. There's no reason why not. You're very welcome to, and there will also be other times in history that will be highlighted in other future books that will also be lots of opportunities for imagination springboards in terms of, just being able to have other ideas and explore new places and new times. So, hope that answers your question for that. I'm just going to give a little bit of a last call in terms of I'm going to be wrapping up pretty soon here. So if anyone has any other questions, you can feel free to drop those in the comments, or else, you can always message me separately if you ever think about any questions in the future that you'd love to connect on. I'd love to hear from you. I really enjoy getting to share about my books, and so I look forward to hearing from you in the future as well. But so I just wanted to wrap up with just chatting a bit about what's next. So now that the trilogy is done, that's really been my focus for the past 2.5 years, has been writing this and getting it out there into the world. But now I've already started working on my next book. It is another book based in the same world in Raphtova. It happens some years in the future. It's not super far into the future. I think it is maybe a couple hundred years in the future. And there are a few tie-over characters, having people who have very long lives or are immortal in the story does lend itself to recurring characters later in history. But there is a new protagonist. The story follows a different character who we have not met before, and her adventures as she has to overcome new challenges and new things going on in the world. But she will be interacting with some of the characters we know and love from the trilogy. And so I wanted to dive into that one right away just because of the tie-over in characters. I'm very familiar with these characters that I have been writing, and so I wanted the chance to write this story that includes those characters while they're still in my mind and while it's going to still be easier to write them. After this book, we have one more book planned that will again be in the comparatively near future in terms of world history in Raphtova, and will again have several tie-over characters. So those are the next projects in line, are those 2 books. It's not considered a part of the series. It won't be the same series. The trilogy stays a trilogy. It'll be the 3 books, but this will be starting out a new series. It's called The Tales of the Inn, and the basic premise of the series will be these are stories of Raphtova. Each story will be independent in the sense that it's not a part of a trilogy, it's not a part of an overarching plot involving a bunch of books, but it will, but because it's in the same world, there'll be a lot of same locations, tie-over characters and things between books, but ultimately it'll be these kind of individual stories that are all collections of stories from the world of Raphtova, which we're really excited to be sharing with all of you. It's a world that I care a lot about, and Jesse and I have had a lot of fun creating and collaborating with many of you as well, people who are part of our gaming groups, and so it's something I'm very excited to be able to share more stories with you. For those of you out there who are interested in supporting me and my writing, I mean, one thing you can do is you can buy the books. I would love for people to read them, to have them, to enjoy them. If you read the books and you enjoy it, I would absolutely love it if you could tell a friend about it. I think that word of mouth is a really awesome way of hearing about new things and hearing about things that we might not have heard about otherwise. I know that if there's something I really enjoy, you know, I'm going to be telling my friends about, like, oh my gosh, I read this book and it was so good. And so, yeah, so if you enjoy it and you want to share about it with a friend, please do. If you read it and you want to leave a review somewhere online, either on my website or Goodreads or wherever, I'd really appreciate that. And ultimately, unless you're a bestseller, you don't make money writing books. Sorry to say. It's just kind of the way of the world for a lot of the arts, is that it's hard to make a living off of. And so I'm super thankful to those of you who are supporting me on an individual basis. I have a community of patrons who give me a certain amount of money each month, just as a way of blessing me, of supporting my work and making it possible for me to keep writing, because I have a family. I'm a mom of 3 kids, and so for me to be able to take time out for my writing is really something I can only do because there's people supporting me in doing that. And in exchange, all of my patrons get a monthly newsletter where I just share bits and pieces about my life, what I've been up to, pictures of the baby, things like that, but also bits and snippets of what I've been working on, sometimes poems or bits of story ideas, insights into my writing process, and just all sorts of little tidbits, just as my way of both saying thank you and also showing you that, yeah, like your support really does make a difference. And these are some of the things I've been able to do that month because of your support. So if that's something that interests you, I just would really appreciate if you would consider that. People support me through my website. So basically, leanewinger.com. Honestly, you can go there at any point. There's all sorts of interesting things to look at. I've got a bunch of my poetry on there, different blog posts, and information on my different books. And there's also a support page there where people can give either one-time or recurring donations as well, which means so much to me. It's what allows me to be able to write books, because as much as I wish that you could make more money from it, I also don't want to, in the sense that I want my writing to be accessible. I don't want it to be super expensive. I want people to be able to enjoy the stuff I've written. And so a lot of my stuff that I write, especially my shorter things, I make available for free in terms of short stories and poems and short scripts and things like that. And the longer ones I do charge for, but it's very much covering the costs plus a bit. So your support means a lot to me and lets me keep doing this. So yeah, thank you so much to all of you who have been my supporters. It's really honestly because of you that I'm able to hold this beautiful trilogy here. It's just honestly mind-blowing to be able to hold them in my hands, to be able to look at each one and just see the representation of just the hundreds and hundreds of hours of work that have gone into it. All of the conversations, the fun, daydreaming and brainstorming and working, writing, editing, and everything that goes into it. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for your support and encouragement. I'm so glad that I could celebrate with you. And I'm sure I'll be talking to you again very soon. There it is. Woo! Alright, bye. Then I'm gonna be finishing up here. Just thank you again so much, and we'll talk again soon. Bye!